Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories. We have stories that should thrill you a little and chill you a little.
It's amazing.
What you'll hear are adventures sent in by you guys, classic stories from the pulp mags, and episodes from the golden age of radio. We have special segments like Ghost Stories with Sylvia.
That's amazing.
And These Are Your Stories. So settle in for the next hour and enjoy the show. One more thing. You just might want to prepare yourself to be taken away from today.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by the word methodical.
I hope that you can at least tie this one to our story.
Oh, very much so. In fact, the title of the story has the word in it.
Is it at least a good one?
Well, good is a relative term.
That means no, right?
That means no.
Lonely black night, ain't it, Foley?
Yeah. A lot better riding around this squad car than pounding the beat.
Yeah, I guess it is. I remember when you and I first joined the force back in...
Hey, Sullivan.
What?
Look there ahead. Somebody's running toward our car, waving like mad.
Slow down, Foley. Let's see what he's in such a hurry about.
Officer! I'm so glad you happened along. Right down there. Just one more block. My fiancée. She just committed suicide.
All right, now, how'd this all happen?
Well, I'm Leon Jones, and this was my fiancée, Sally Lawrence. I just bought the ring today.
Bought the ring today, huh?
That's right. Here it is, even in the original box.
Okay, go on.
Well, tonight we took a walk after I'd given her the ring. We stopped here about the middle of the bridge and stood looking down into the water.
Then what?
Well, all of a sudden, Sally said she wasn't going to marry me, that she was just tired of living. She took off the ring I'd just given her and handed it back to me. I asked her what was the matter, what had happened.
Had she ever seen down at the mouth before this?
Once in a while, nothing serious.
By the way, Mr. Jones, when did you put that ring back in the case?
Why, I don't know. I'm afraid I have sort of an orderly type of mind. Why?
Nothing at all. When you asked her what had happened, did she tell you?
No, she didn't. She just turned around and started fumbling in her purse. I thought she was getting her handkerchief, but then I saw the glint of light on a small bottle as she lifted it to her lips. And she collapsed, just as though she'd been hit by lightning. It was all done so fast. I called to her, kept speaking her name, but it was too late.
Let's step over and examine the body a little closer.
Sullivan, it's an open and shut case of suicide by poison.
Well, maybe. Yes, there's the bottle, all right, just where it fell. It's empty, too. Now, pull out the cork. See what this smells like. Take a whiff, Foley. Stuff knocks you out the minute it hits your tongue.
Hey, Jones said she fell over just like she'd been hit by lightning.
Wait a minute, Foley. That's it. This isn't suicide, this is murder. Murder by Mr. Leon Jones.
So Leon Jones is a murderer. Do you know the clue that points him out? We'll hear in a moment, but first...
Well, I have to tell you, BG, I would not put a possible poison agent next to my nose or mouth.
That does seem foolhardy. I am quite surprised that you wouldn't do it.
What is that supposed to mean?
Just that you are not known for your lack of foolduggery.
When have I ever played the part of a fool?
A better question would be, when have you not played the fool?
BG, you bring me such great joy.
Why, thank you, Ron.
When you leave the room, sometimes I crack myself up.
And now, let's hear the solution from Police Lieutenant Sullivan.
Miss Lawrence apparently refused to marry you tonight, Mr. Jones. Refused to even take the ring, is my guess, and you decided to murder her. You stated that Miss Lawrence collapsed immediately after she drank the contents of the bottle. After finding what the bottle contained, we know this is true. But tell me, Mr. Jones, if your fiancée dropped dead immediately after she drank from the bottle, then why is it I had to remove the cork before I could smell what was in the bottle? No one drinking the contents of this bottle could possibly have had time to cork it before death struck. A neat little trick, Mr. Jones, but your mind was just a little too methodical to be really clever. Come along, we've got a little trek down to headquarters.
Methodical to a fault.
which led to an arrest for murder.
Yep. You know, I always try to stay methodical and logical with everything I do.
Oh, I am sure that is true.
That includes making this podcast each week.
If only it didn't include the 5-minute mystery.
What? Oh, yeah, that's more the fault part.
What's that you say?
Hello, and welcome to the podcast. On the show today, we have 3 stories from you guys that go from Chupacabra to the West Lawn Pavilion. Then we hear a true story from the archives of Scotland Yard, all about murder and rage. We end the show with a brand new, not-so-important times in history, where the Detroit Police Department have a mishap that you won't believe. It's going to be amazing. I have some very exciting news for you. Next week's podcast is going to be a special extended show featuring our very own Sylvia Shults. Sylvia will be presenting the true crime story of
Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41.
Yep, that's right, the Lizzie Borden Story. You're not going to want to miss this. Also, if you listen to the show on our YouTube channel, you will be able to follow along with photos and slide. This is a first for the podcast, and I can't wait for you guys to see and hear it. Now let's get on with today's show. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. They have over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, computer, Kindle. Whatever you have, you can listen to Audible on it. So what am I listening to right now? We Are Legion, We Are Bob. Bobverse, Book 1 by Dennis E. Taylor. Bob Johansson has just sold his software company for a small fortune and is looking forward to a life of leisure. The first item on his to-do list is spending his newfound windfall. On an urge to splurge, he signs up to have his head cryogenically preserved in case of death. Then he gets himself killed crossing the street. Take a listen to this from the book.
Good. You're awake. I tried to respond, but what came out was something like a cross between a cough and static. For God's sake, that sounded like a voice synthesizer having a breakdown. Freud put down the tablet, leaned forward, and rested his arms on the desk or table or whatever. Please keep trying. It can take a few attempts for the guppy interface to mesh. I considered what he'd said. It immediately brought up 3 points. Point 1, I wasn't dead. Well, okay, I think therefore I am, yada yada. Call that one proven. Point 2, I wasn't good as new. In fact, I appeared to be speaking through a voice synthesizer, but doing so by mental control, which meant, point 3, that the technology had advanced significantly since I'd been hit by the car. How long had I been out? And what the heck was a guppy interface? I tried again, concentrating on forming the words. Someone want to fill me in on what's going on? Freud clapped his hands once. Excellent! I am Dr. Landers, Bob. I will answer any questions you have, and I will help to prepare you for your new life. New life? What's wrong with my old one? I already don't like where this is going. Dr. Landers pulled the tablet over so that it was directly in front of him. So, Bob, what's the last thing you remember? A car coming right at me. I was sure it was going to hit me. I'm pretty sure it did. It did indeed, Bob. You arrived at the hospital in critical condition with a very poor prognosis. Per your contract with Cryo Eterna, they were standing by with a cryo container when time of death was pronounced. Well, good to know my money wasn't wasted anyway. So what year is it? Dr. Landers laughed. So nice to talk to a subject so quick on the uptake. It is June 24th, 2133, and we are currently in New Handletown, which would have been Portland in your day. I was surprised by that. So that's 117 years. Wait, where did that come from? I'd always been able to do math in my head with no effort, but it normally required me to at least go through the calculation steps. This answer had arrived as if spoken in my ear. Something to investigate later. Add to to-do list. I turned my attention back to the doctor. The shirt made a little more sense now. Styles would change in 100+ years. I really wanted to get a look at that watch, though. Whose handle? I asked. Now, Bob, we're getting ahead of ourselves. I have an established script for bringing candidates up to date, and history lessons come later. So, what happened to old Handletown? Dr. Landers smiled and shook his head in mock sorrow. I sighed and nodded. Well, I tried to nod. My field of view didn't move, so I had control over my eyes, but not my head. I was starting to suspect some kind of locked-in syndrome. Instead, I grunted. Right. So, can we talk about how much of me is still human? This artificial voice thing tells me that you haven't been able to make me good as new. How much is Borg? Should I ask for a mirror? Or would that be a bad idea? Dr. Landers glanced down at his tablet and hesitated, then looked back at me. It would be inaccurate to compare you to a Borg. If I remember my Trek trivia correctly, they are at least partly human. I think Mr. Data would be a better comparison. I simply stared at him for what seemed like forever. My mind was blank. I couldn't seem to form a thought. Finally, I found my voice. Excuse me? I noted almost in passing that I still wasn't having a panic attack. For the first time, I suspected I knew why. You, Bob, are what most people would call an artificial intelligence. Although that's not strictly accurate, you are a copy of the mind of Robert Johansen, created by scanning his cryogenically frozen brain at the subcellular level and converting the data into a computer simulation. You are, essentially, a computer program that thinks it's Robert Johansen. A replicant.
Well, waking up 117 years later, Bob discovers that his mind has been uploaded into a sentient space probe with the ability to replicate itself. Bob and his clones are on a mission to find new homes for humanity and boldly go where no Bob has gone before. Taylor's hilarious novel sets the stage for the magnificent narrator, Ray Porter, who reveals the brave new world of corpuscles, artificial intelligence, interstellar space probes, and space colonization in tantalizing detail. Now, does this sound interesting? You can have We Are Legion, We Are Bob today. Here's what Audible has set up for us. They are offering a free audiobook and 30 days to give you the opportunity to check out the service. To download your free audiobook, go to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. Again, that's audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories, and you too can have We Are Legion, We Are Bob. Thank you, Audible. And now, it's time for your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
Our first story comes from returning writer Jeremy Vaughn from Buffalo, New York. Jeremy last sent in a story called Bigfoot Calling Bigfoot from episode number 362. He writes, "Hey Ron, I'm back as promised. I'm still writing my book, which is now nearing completion. I want to thank you for all the help you've been in both sharing my stories and editing them. I've learned a lot from you. This story I'm about to tell you didn't happen to me, but to a friend I made while out collecting Chupacabra tales in the state of New Mexico. I hope that you can use it. Jeremy." Well, of course, I told him yes, and that I can honestly say of all the cryptids we've had on the show, the Chupacabra has been the most elusive. I believe that this is only the second one in the history of the podcast. The Chupacabra, or goatsucker, is a legendary creature in the folklore of the Americas, with its first sighting being in Puerto Rico. The name comes from the animal's reported habit of attacking and drinking the blood of livestock, including goats. Here is the story Jeremy collected he calls The Goats of Chupacabra. My wife and I were traveling along the border of Texas and New Mexico. We had just finished visiting Roswell and had decided to stay overnight in Clovis. It was there we met Maria del Carmen. She was a waitress at a small diner just outside of town. We told her that we were traveling the country looking for stories about monsters. She smiled and said that she had one that she would be happy to share. I grabbed my recorder, and here is what she told us. When I was a young girl, I was raised on a farm with many animals. Each night we would put them all to bed, close the coops, lock the gates, and gather the goats to their pen. One night I saw a very strange thing. A creature had come in with the goats that night. I wondered at what could be so ugly. It was as big as a goat, hairless, smelled bad, and had a very strange mouth. The bottom teeth seemed to hang out on their own, and the upper teeth pointed straight out like tusks. I'd never seen anything like it, and it scared me. I called my father, and he came running. He yelled, "Chupacabra!" and fired his gun at it. The thing was lightning fast, and it seemed to almost disappear in an instant. After getting the goats settled, we all went in for dinner and then to bed. During the night, I was awoken by men shouting. My father and his brothers were all outside screaming and yelling. Then there was gunfire, followed by the most unbelievable scream. It was a cross between man and monster. I quickly dressed, put my boots on, and ran outside. When I got there, I'll never forget what I saw. 5 of our goats lay dead on the ground. Their throats had been torn out. My father and his brothers were dragging the beast from earlier that evening to the fire pit. There they built a funeral pyre and burned the remains that very night. My father said it was the only way to be sure the monstra would never return. I'll never forget that beast with its strange naked body and awful teeth, but I think it was the eyes that scared me the most. They seemed intelligent and reeked of pure evil. We talked for some time after that. I have no doubt that her story is true, and personally one that I would not want to experience. I hope that your listeners enjoyed it and that you can find a place for it on your show. Jeremy Vaughn, Buffalo, New York. Well, Jeremy, as you can see, I did tell your story, and I thank you and Maria for it. I've heard a few Chupacabra stories before, and none of them had any violence. Just the threat of it. I, too, would not like meeting one of these beasties on my own. I think there's a lot of truth to this cryptid because it's the easiest to explain, and does have a rich history to back it up. This next story comes from Rita Whitestone in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Ron, I have a ghost story for you. This is my first encounter with them, but it would not be the last. I work as an ER nurse and have more experiences than I can count. This was just the first one. I was a new nurse at our hospital and only been working there for a couple of months. I just brought a patient up to day surgery from the ER for an endoscopy, and they had called back down to ask me to bring her family up. It appears that she only spoke Italian, and they needed someone to help with the consent forms. I found the family, and after dropping them off, I walked past the waiting room to head back down the hall to the elevators. I took the back way to get to the ER, so the hallways were all deserted. It used to be the pediatric wing of the hospital, but it had been shut down for years. Now the rooms are empty and full of stored equipment. As I reached the old nurses' station at the T-junction between the pediatric hallway and the one that goes to the elevators, I saw a little girl standing across from the nurses' station a bit further down the hall. She had big pigtails, was wearing a brown dress, white shoes, and holding a teddy bear. I thought perhaps she was a family member who had walked away from the waiting room. I was concerned that she would go into one of the rooms, get lost, or hurt, so I said, "Hey, little girl, what are you doing? You shouldn't be over there. You could get hurt." I walked around the nurse's station to go grab her hand and bring her back. When I came around the other side, she had vanished. Every hair on my body stood up straight, and I turned and ran like a bat out of hell to the elevator. I pounded that button for what seemed like an eternity until the elevator got to the floor. As I got back to the ER, I walked up to the nurse's desk, white as a sheet, and one of the older nurses looked at me and said, "What's wrong with you?" I remember babbling like an idiot as I tried to tell them what happened. After listening to me for a moment or two, one of the nurses said, "Oh, you saw the little girl ghost. She's been around here for years." I remember saying something like, "Thanks for telling me." Apparently, the little girl ghost has been seen down in the ER, ducking in and out of patient rooms and peeking around curtains. My husband, who is also a nurse, was working on the 4th floor, and he said that one night a whole row of patients started yelling about a little girl who was running around their rooms. I guess she gets around. Rita Whitestone, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Well, Rita, she certainly does. I love a good ghost story, and that is a good one. Thank you for sharing it, and I hope you will share some of those other stories that you spoke of with us. Our last story was sent to us from Killadolix. Sorry, I tried to trace it down, and the best I could do was a user of the same name on Reddit. He or she posted this story there that I'm about to read. So if you are Killadolix and want to tell us your real name and where you're from, I would love to hear from you. Killa writes, "We have a really old mental health facility in my neighborhood. They started building it in 1890, and it was fully operational by the early 1900s. It spans across a huge stretch of land. Also, as cliché as it is, there were indigenous settlers on this land as far back as 10,000 years ago. There are 4 main buildings: West Lawn, East Lawn, North Lawn, and Central Lawn Pavilions. There's also a 5th building that was reserved for children, but it has fallen apart to the point where only one wall remains. The oldest is the West Lawn Pavilion, and the creepiest looking by far. Killa posted a picture of this building, which I will have linked in the show notes. My friend and I have a weird habit of walking around the hospital and through the on-site cemetery. While we were walking past the West Lawn Pavilion, I noticed a doorbell next to the entrance for the very first time. I asked my friend if he dared me to ring it, to which he replied, no, but I started up the stairs anyway because I am an idiot. Standing at the door, I couldn't help but imagine how long this building has been standing here and how many lives it has affected. I rang the doorbell, and to my surprise, the creepiest buzz sounded off, much louder than I anticipated. Exactly at that moment, I got a tickle on the back of my calf, which seriously freaked me out, but I was still in a playful mood, and it wasn't dark out, so I wasn't too scared. Although I did run back down the stairs to my friend. As we started walking towards his car, he said, "Oh my God, what happened to your leg?" I was wearing shorts and looked at the back of my calf, where I saw a bruise that wasn't there before. It was completely black and purple and nearly the size of my entire calf. The bruise was there for several weeks, and to this day, I can still feel it. Weird, huh? Needless to say, we don't play there anymore. Killadolics. Well, Killa, that is a strange story. It could be as simple as a broken blood vessel, but I am left in wonder. I don't think I'd want to play around there anymore either. I did track down some information using the picture you posted. I think it might be from the West Lawn Pavilion, Riverview Hospital, Vancouver, Canada. If I'm right, please let me know. At one time, Riverview Hospital was known as Essendale Hospital, named after Dr. Henry Essen Young, 1862 to 1939. He played a very important role in establishing the facility. The neighborhood where the hospital is located also became known as the Essendale neighborhood. How about that? Thank you, Killa. Do you have a story that you want to tell on the show? If you do, we want to hear it. It can be about any subject and from any genre. Heck, it doesn't even have to be true. Original fiction or stories from the public domain are quite welcome. To submit them, just head to ronsamazingstories.com and click on the Story Submissions banner. Fill out the form, and soon your story will be heard. Do you have a story but don't want to write it? That's okay too. Just leave your contact information, a brief description of your story, and I'll get back to you. We can write it together. However, if you don't do it, your story remains just that, your story. Why not make it our story? To warm us up for next week's special podcast about Lizzie Borden, I thought we would head to the world of old-time radio and take a look at what a true crime broadcast sounded like back then. I even found a show on fellow axe murderer Dr. Buck Ruxton. It comes from the series The Secrets of Scotland Yard and is titled Dr. Ruxton Axe Killer. Is this a true story? More about that later. It first aired in the United States sometime in 1957. Now, I'm going to warn you that there are some very scary bits early in the story.
How do you do? I've been asking myself why it is that criminal trials grip the imagination of the meekest law-abiders among us. What is the psychological urge that holds us to the crime columns of our daily papers and sends so many of us packing to the public seats of the law courts? It's quite a question, isn't it? Well, I've got an explanation for you. I'd like to read to you a few lines written by a great British statesman and political writer of the 18th century, Edmund Burke. This is what he says. The annals of criminal jurisprudence exhibit human nature in a variety of positions, at once the most striking, interesting, and affecting. The real culprits, as original characters, stand forward on the canvas of humanity as prominent objects for our special study. How well that slightly antique phrase applies to the macabre figure of Dr. Buck Ruxton, who slew his English wife, lovely Isabel, and Mary Rogerson, their servant, and dissected their unfortunate remains into 200 all but unidentifiable parts. Women in the crowded gallery of the court grew faint and retired, while expert witnesses gave evidence that was indisputable. And all the time, the prisoner's written confession lay in a sealed envelope addressed to a Sunday newspaper and in the custody of a friend who had strict instructions that it was only to be opened in the event of his death. But let me take you back to early September 1935. We shall go to the little English town of Lancaster. It's a pretty place, and at number 2 Dalton Square, we find the well-loved Dr. Ruxton at work in his surgery.
Do you think the little chap will be all right now, Doctor?
He will be all right, Mrs. Davis. It was quite a simple operation, you know. But if he should be a little fretful when the anesthetic wears off, just give him one of these tablets crushed up in water.
Oh, thank you, Doctor. You're so kind.
Now you run along and look after yourself and try to get a good night's rest. And keep the little lad quiet, won't you?
Oh, of course. And thank you again. You're so patient with children.
Not at all, my dear lady. Good night to you.
Good night, Dr. Ruxton.
I'll look into him in the morning. Isabel! Isabel!
Madam's gone to bed, sir.
Oh, it is you, Mary, eh?
She had a headache and turned in early, sir.
Ah, she did she?
Yes, sir.
You have a cigarette, Mary?
No, thank you, sir.
Nice stockings you are wearing, eh? Sit down.
No, thank you, sir. I'd rather stand.
My wife went out this evening, didn't she?
Yes.
Where did she go?
She went round to the dispenser for the children's medicine.
You are lying, aren't you, Mary? Eh?
I'm sure I don't know what you mean, sir.
She has got a lover, hasn't she? And that is where she went this evening, to see him, eh? Why don't you be frank? I know all about it.
I'm sure you're wrong, sir.
How old are you, my dear?
I'm 20.
You are a very pretty girl. Come here. I want to talk to you, huh?
Oh, no!
What's this?
So you are here, huh?
Yes. You may go, Mary.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
It's all right. You may go. How dare you, Buck? I've warned you before about that girl. She's clean and decent. You wouldn't understand.
I know she is in league with you, huh? I was trying to make her tell me about your love affairs.
Oh, you swine. Your mind's full of black shadows and filthy, horrible things. They exist only in your imagination. You're trying to make yourself believe that I'm unfaithful, but you know that I'm not.
I know that you are, Isabel. Do you think I do not notice the sidelong glances you exchange with any man who happens to turn up? Of course, I see it every time we go out. You married me. It was an experiment, wasn't it, huh? And now you had enough. There is only one treatment for you. Isabel. Speak to me, Isabel. I am sorry. I am not fit to live. Please forgive me.
Oh, God, I forgive you, Buck. I always do after these scenes.
If only you would strike me or punish me for my wickedness, I love you so much.
Mommy!
The children are awake. I must go to them.
The complex story of Ruxton's abnormal personality was never revealed during the trial. He had an inferiority kink, which he carried throughout his life, and did his poor, unfortunate wife suffer for it. As an officer in the Royal Indian Medical Corps, he had associated with Englishmen on equal terms, on duty. But off parade, he'd imagined himself to be the subject of persecution. He fought against this with amazing pertinacity and made up his mind that he would carve out a career that the English would respect. It became an obsession. Come back with me to number 2 Dalton Square, Lancaster, a few days later, the 15th of September, and the time 1 a.m.
Is that you, ma'am?
Oh, yes, Mary. You made me jump. Whatever are you doing up at this time?
Shh. What's happened? It's him. He's been going on like a madman since the surgery closed. He's been threatening to kill you when he came back. I nearly went for the police, but I thought of the scandal, ma'am.
Oh, poor Mary. He didn't do anything to you, did he?
No, I locked myself in with the children. I'd have run away if it hadn't been for them. And you?
Oh, my poor child. You must leave here in the morning. It isn't a fit place for you. Give me your hand. You're trembling.
I'm not really afraid. It was the look in his eyes.
There, you should sleep with me. The children are all right, are they?
Yes, I've locked them in. Here's the key.
Oh, this is dreadful. I don't know what to do. If only I didn't love him. I've tried to be a good wife to him.
You've given him 3 lovely children. Oh, why don't you take him away? You've never seen him like he was tonight, shouting that you were something terrible. Oh, man.
I've managed him before, and I shall manage him now. He's my husband, Mary, but you must go.
I've set a bit of supper for you in the lounge.
Oh, I don't think I can manage anything, but it's very sweet of you, dear.
I think he's asleep now. I believe he took something.
Yes.
Were the illuminations nice in Blackpool?
Yes, they were lovely. I met my sisters, Mrs. Nelson and Mrs. Madden, you know. We all went along the front. They wouldn't let me get away until 11:30.
And was the tower all lit up?
Yes, it looked beautiful. Everyone was laughing and happy, walking along the front 20 and 30 abreast. There was music everywhere. Oh, it was like going into a different world. You must go there tomorrow, Mary. I'll give you your fare. You must see it.
It sounds wonderful. Would you like a cup of tea?
Yes, I would. I suddenly realized that I had a bit of a headache. Are there any aspirins about?
No, but I expect there's some in the doctor's surgery.
I'll go and have a look. Mary! What's happened in here? The furniture's overturned, drawers pulled out, bottles smashed on the floor.
It was him. I told you he'd been pretty bad.
But he smashed the place up. Didn't it wake the children?
Yes, that's when I went up to them.
But look at his papers. They're everywhere. His casebook. He's torn it up. Mary, what are all these letters? They're from India. Shut the door, Mary.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, never knew he had letters from India. Look at the postmarks. Some of them are quite recent. What's this? My ever dearest darling, I treasure any letter of yours, my dear, like jewels and pearls. Keep them under lock and key. People over here talk that you are leading a gay life in England. But I have complete confidence in you, and I know that you will keep your word to me. Until I die, I shall always think of the 6 happy months that I spent with you, with thousands of affections and kisses. Your ever-loving wife. His wife. But I'm his wife. Oh, no. No.
Oh, ma'am. But Daddy.
Love letters, all of them, are from his wife in India. Oh, don't you realize what this means? I'm not married to him. He's a bigamist. And the children.
So you come back, you dirty, eh? You'll let me get my hands on you, huh?
You're a devil, you're not a man. You're a devil. I know all about you. You've got a wife in India. You're not fit to land.
Devil, am I, huh?
I'll kill you. I'll kill you. Oh! You've done it. I knew you'd do it. You've killed her. She's dead.
Come here, Mary Rogerson. I like you, but you seem too much. It is a shame, isn't it, Mary? You cannot get away. I've got you cornered. You could have made for the door, but it is too late. Do not cry. One little pain and it will be over, huh? I know where to use the knife. I'll make it quick for you, Mary.
He stands forward on the canvas of humanity for our special study. It's a little bit terrifying, isn't it? And it's real. But don't you think that perhaps the study of such a man as Ruxton may have helped us to understand the awful possibilities of the human mind? It has certainly helped the scientists of Scotland Yard to keep careful tabs on known criminals who are suspected of similar mental complexes. Now let us go back to September the 29th, 1935, just 14 days after the crime in Lancaster. The place is the little town of Moffat, 63 miles from Edinburgh. The scene is the local police station.
Very nice too, Sergeant, if I may say so.
I was just looking in the book. I see old Maguire's reported the loss of his bull terrier. That'll be the one that bit Mrs. McPherson, or I'm a Dutchman.
Aye, and I'm a Dutchman if I didn't hear Mr. McPherson's gun go off in McPherson's cowshed yesterday morning. I asked him what he was doing. I reckon I know now.
Did he have a gun license?
Aye.
Pity. I'm rather partial to bull terriers.
Sergeant.
Hello, what's the...
Sergeant, quick, down by the bridge.
Take it easy. What's the trouble?
My sister found it and then she came to me. I had a looking after her all the way here.
What is it, man?
There's a parcel in the ravine and there's a human arm sticking out of it.
Scottish report for information CID just come in.
Oh, let me see it. Thank you. Moffat, eh? 4 parcels containing human remains found in ravine on Edinburgh Carlisle Road. Stop. Remains consist of 2 heads. Good heavens. 2 legs, 2 arms, 2 hands, several large pieces of flesh, 4 or 5 large bones, and a number of smaller bones, portions of a human trunk, and the lower portions of 2 legs.
Inspector Green of the CID lost no time in visiting the scene of this gruesome discovery.
We've discovered 30 parcels so far, Inspector, and a dreadful job it's been.
Yes, I'm sure it has. You're sending them straight off to Professor Glaister as they come in, I take it?
That's right, sir. They're going straight up to the hospital in Edinburgh.
I understand that the murderers made every effort to destroy all means of identifying his victim.
They are hacked to pieces, sir. But I understand the remains are probably those of a man and a woman.
A man and a woman, eh? I see that one of the parcels was wrapped in a child's woolen rompers, another in an old green blouse, a quantity of cotton wool, a man's vest, some sheeting, and a number of newspapers.
They're not a lot of help, sir, but they do fix the date of the crime more or less. This Sunday one, you see, is dated September the 15th, so it couldn't have happened before then.
And a number of the parcels were found along the River Lynn.
That's a contributory stream of the River Annan, sir.
And the remains were well above the level of the water. You had any heavy rainstorms lately?
Aye, sir. Let me see. It rained heavily on September the 18th and again on the 19th.
Ah, so the packages would have been carried high up the banks of the stream by the swollen waters, and when the water subsided, they'd have been left there, wouldn't they?
You're right, sir.
So we can fix the date of the crime as being somewhere between the 15th and 19th.
Somewhere between the 15th and 19th of September, 2 people out of a population of 48 millions had disappeared. There was little hope of identifying the bodies, and the first step was to make inquiries regarding all missing persons in England and Scotland. The investigation proved unproductive. Hardly surprising, you say? But the investigations were working along other lines. All the shreds of newspapers which had been found in the packages had been sent along to their appropriate publishers. And at last, the first real clue was furnished by a Sunday paper on September the 15th. Published in London, this copy proved to be of a limited edition, and it had been circulated in the district of Lancaster. Investigations were concentrated on the Lancaster area, and within a matter of hours, police officers were making their reports to Captain Van, the Chief Constable of Lancashire.
Come in. Yes, Inspector Green, got anything?
Yes, sir. I think I have. A girl named Mary Rochester is missing from her home. She's been employed as a nursemaid in Dr. Ruxton's house.
Have you seen the doctor?
No, sir. I went round, but both he and his wife were out. But I spoke to a neighbour, a Mrs. Oxley, who'd been charing for the Ruxtons, and she said the doctor had told her that Mrs. Ruxton had gone away for a holiday and taken Mary Rogerson with her.
I see. Find out the relationship between the doctor and his wife.
Right, sir.
Oh, and one more thing. You see those articles on the table?
Yes, sir. A green blouse and Kitty's rompers.
See if Mrs. Rogerson can identify them.
Mrs. Rogerson's Mary's stepmother, by the way, identified the green blouse immediately by a patch which she herself had sewn underneath the arm. In the words of Scotland Yard, the case was now developing satisfactorily. Reports were coming into the Chief Constable's office from different parts of the town. Remember, with a small population, news is apt to travel quickly.
Have you observed the constantly returning date in these statements, Green?
You mean the 15th of September, sir?
Yes. We appear to know quite a lot about Dr. Ruxton's movements on that day. Read this.
Thank you, sir. At 6:30 a.m., Mrs. Oxley, the Ruxton's charwoman, was preparing to go to work when the doctor called and told her not to bother to go to his house that day.
Oh, Mrs. Oxley, my wife and Mary have gone away on a holiday to Edinburgh, and I am taking the children to Morecambe. But come as usual tomorrow.
At 10 a.m., Miss Roberts, a newsagent, called at Ruxton's house to deliver some papers. He answered the door himself. He seemed agitated and was holding his right hand against his body.
I am on my own today. Mary has gone up to Scotland.
At 11 a.m., a Mrs. Whiteside brought her son for a minor operation. It had already been arranged, and she was sharp on time. Again, he opened the door himself.
I am sorry, but I cannot perform the operation today as my wife is away in Scotland and there is only the maid and myself here. We are busy taking up the carpets and things ready for the decorators in the morning.
Anything else, sir?
Yes. At 2:30 p.m., he took his 3 children to the house of Mr. Anderson, a Morecambe dentist, a friend of the family, in whose charge he left them. And then at 6 o'clock, he seems to have lost his head. He went to the house of one of his patients, Mrs. Hampshire.
I am struggling to get my house ready for the decorators, Mrs. Hampshire. They are coming in the morning. My wife has gone to Blackpool, and Mary is away on holiday, and I have cut my hand very badly, and I wondered if you would help me.
He actually invited the lady to go back to his house with him and help him to straighten it out.
Inside the Ruxton house, the startled Mrs. Hampshire found chaos. The radio was blaring, stair carpets had been pulled up, straw was scattered everywhere, and plaster had been ripped from the walls. A supper meal laid in the lounge was untouched. Upstairs, doors were locked, and the bath was discolored a dirty yellow up to within a few inches of the top. His action in taking Mrs. Hampshire to the house was inexplicable, for, in consequence of what she saw there, she later became one of the principal witnesses for the Crown. Of course, he may have taken her there to save his reason. I personally should not have cared to enter such a house unescorted. Would you? Another point which amazed the police was Ruxton's visit to the Chief Constable.
Captain Van, I have come to you for protection. Have you heard the stories in the town?
Sit down, Dr. Ruxton. Please calm yourself. Now, what is it?
They are saying that I know all about the Moffat bodies. They are saying that this horrible crime is connected with the disappearance of my wife and maid. Even the papers are making these awful suggestions. The publicity is ruining my practice. Captain Van, you must please publish that there is no connection between the two. You must help me to find my wife.
The Chief Constable consoled him to the best of his ability and proceeded with the investigations. Inspector Green was making good headway.
I've collected some fresh evidence, sir. Ruxton told a friend that his wife had gone away in his car, not returned, but he allowed the car to be seen in Lancaster. He's also invented a totally untrue story that Mary Rogerson was going to have a baby and had disappeared for that reason. When I asked him how he knew, he replied, by her eyes and other symptoms. I'm certain he was lying, sir.
The case for the public prosecutor was approaching completion. At the Crown Laboratory in Edinburgh, Dr. Glaister and a team of experts had assembled large parts of the two bodies. Artificial teeth were made and fitted to secure an indication of what the mouths had looked like in life. In all, 20 sets of 250 pictures were completed, and these included photographs taken from an overhead scaffolding after portions of the bodies had been assembled on the floor. By the 11th of October, Ruxton knew that he was a doomed man. He even approached Inspector Green.
He took me by the shoulders and shouted as he flourished a newspaper in my face.
Look at this, Inspector Green, look at it. Why do they accuse me of the Moffat murder? Somebody will be putting a dead body on my doorstep soon, and I shall be accused of killing it.
On the following day, October the 12th, 1935, the Chief Constable requested Ruxton to go to his office, saying that it was thought he could help in finding his wife and the maid. Dr. Buck Ruxton never returned from this visit. He was detained, and early on the morning of the 13th, he was charged with the murder of Mary Rogerson. There followed weekly remands until November the 5th.
During this time, we were making a minute examination of the house in Dalton Square. The story of what had happened there was slowly unfolding. We completed our evidence with the discovery in a locked drawer of the letters from Ruxton's legal wife in India. Here, then, was the last link. On November the 5th, Ruxton was charged with the murder of his wife, Isabella Ruxton, and the maid, Miss Mary Rogerson.
On December the 13th, he was committed for trial on both charges at the Manchester Assizes. In his charge to the jury, Mr. Justice Singleton referred to the distinguished body of evidence in the highest terms. He concluded by saying to the jury,
Gentlemen of the jury, you have heard the evidence, but if, in your opinion, there is any doubt in this case, the prisoner must have the benefit of that doubt. But if there is no doubt, then your verdict must be equally clear and justice must be done.
There was no doubt, and Ruxton was found guilty and sentenced to death on March the 13th, 1936. The sentence was duly carried out on the 12th of May at Strangeways Prison, Manchester. And a little footnote in this case. Throughout the trial, Ruxton behaved like a rag doll. He wept and protested his innocence. At the moment the square piece of black cloth was placed on the head of Mr. Justice Singleton, he became still and composed. As the judge concluded the formal sentence, Ruxton, with upraised arm, gave in the salute of an Oriental warrior. Then, turning sharp left, he gave a similar salute to an astonished jury before warders hurried him away. And the written confession in the sealed envelope? It was not published until several days after his execution. In it, all he said was, I killed Mrs. Ruxton in a fit of temper. I thought she'd been with a man. Mary Rogerson was present at the time. I had to kill her.
Okay, after that, what do you think? Were true crime programs all that different from today's? I, for one, was surprised to hear that they are not, which in itself is amazing. I guess a good format is good, even in the 1940s. It turns out that today's story is true and is one of England's most interesting crime stories. However, there is some question as to if Ruxton used an axe. He may have used a butcher's knife. In an earlier time, just before and following the Second World War, the general public was fascinated by the subject of crime. Numerous magazines of true crime stories filled the newsstands. Radio also helped fill the need with fictional heroes such as Johnny Dollar and the Saint. However, few true crime dramas other than Gangbusters or Dragnet were available on the radio. The Secrets of Scotland Yard was a successful crime drama series, initially airing internationally between 1949 and 1951. Selected episodes finally came to the U.S. for a brief run in 1957 over the Mutual Broadcasting System. The series boasted well over 100 episodes and used well-known actors as hosts such as Orson Welles and Clive Brooke. Brooke was eventually replaced as narrator by an actor portraying the character Superintendent X of Scotland Yard. Each week, an audience of anxious radio listeners tuned in to hear these true crime stories of the London Metropolitan Police unfold, as the detectives of the Yard investigated some of England's most famous criminals.
Not so important times in history.
In this segment, we take a look at historical events that may otherwise go unnoticed. We look at history with a fish-eyed lens, giving a perspective that should provide no insight to anyone or any time. But it is historical, or hysterical, as the case may be. Join us now for this event in history. So today we head to recent history with this story. But before I tell it to you, I want you to know that you can actually watch a video of this on YouTube. I will have the link in the show notes. Guys, this really happened. The incident occurred in the summer of 2017. 2 Detroit police officers from the 12th Precinct were undercover, posing as drug dealers, and went to a drug house to try to operate a sting. There they met 2 buyers, who happened to be undercover officers from the 11th Precinct. From there, things got wild, where more officers showed up with a search warrant, and then things escalated to the point where both groups of cops were shoving each other and even throwing some punches. Probably not their best moment. If all of this sounds like a cartoon come to life or a Keystone Cops movie from the 1920s, well, I wouldn't have been surprised if Bugs Bunny himself orchestrated this whole thing. After the incident, Detroit Chief of Police James Craig said it's probably one of the most embarrassing things he's ever seen in his department. Probably? If you want to catch that video for yourself, check out the show notes. That was episode number 579, and Jeremy Vaughn, Rita Whitestone, and Killadolix were our storytellers this week. How did they do? In my book, those were some great stories. Thank you. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find any of the links I mentioned and how to contact us. Do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it, and please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. Clicking that follow or like button helps us grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.
All of the vintage audio used in the podcast is believed to be in the public domain. Ron's Amazing Stories does not own the rights to any of the old-time radio used here. If you hold the rights to any of the shows played, please contact us immediately at ronsamazingstories.com.